Yo, 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 welcome back. Welcome back. It's your boy Rob coming back at you once again with another video. Before we get started, you already know what I'm about to ask, so please do it. Blacklight Revelations 1 and 2. Smash the like buttons on this video. Make sure you hit that bell icon for notification. Go to the About page, follow us on all of our other social media, and hit us up. All right? So, with that being said, let's get into this, shall we? Today's video is going to be a little bit different because I've been trying to tell people that they need to beware of Joe Biden. And, you know, people don't listen, but it is what it is. I'm a firm believer in knowing your history is one of the way that you prevent it from repeating itself. Now, clearly, with the increased rhetoric, the upscaling of tensions in the political environment, and, you know, the social reforming of political correctness has been watering down a lot of history. But what people don't notice is that their rights are also being watered down, and that there are a lot of people in the United States that are in grave danger, financially as well as politically. It's my opinion that from my estimates, black people are on a path to become political prisoners in the United States by the year 2090. Okay. And I will explain why this is. And this is why people need to wake up, because the shot clock is on 5 and we're down by more than 3 points. You know what I'm saying? So people need to wake up. People need to start doing research. People need to start paying attention to every detail that all of these politicians say. So, with that being said, what I want to do is I want to, again, go over Joe Biden's nonsensical communication with the black simps, aka civil rights leaders. All right. Al Sharpton, the hair products walking advertisement. All right. So, I'm actually going to shut off the music because I want everyone to pay very close attention to this. Okay. So here in this article, you know, we've read this. All right. But we'll go through it again. All right. It says House, Senate, and around the country have been urging President Joe Biden to use the maximum amount of effective authority available to him in order to grow the economy, expand civil rights, protect the climate, and otherwise implement the agenda he ran on, despite the expected obstruction from a Republican Senate. There is no obstruction. The only obstruction is him. He's just choosing what to do and what not to do. Okay. So here it says, on Tuesday, a group of civil rights leaders urged him privately to take a slew of executive actions during a 2-hour virtual meeting. All right. So pay attention to this. All right. They want him to do these things using executive orders. And if you pay attention to my video that I did yesterday, I explained how he lied to them. And again, because of not knowing history, not knowing definitions, not understanding basic concepts, these people, and there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think there's 8. 8 of them. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah. And 2 presidential representatives, 2 executive branch representatives, president and vice president. These 8 idiots got out-talked by one person who was talking because of incompetence. These are incompetent people. This should terminate these people. Okay. One of the major focuses should be in eradicating these people of their positions, because they clearly are incompetent. They got nothing out of this meeting. Okay. But I want to show you that this meeting was actually a detriment and is actually a, you know, indication of what is going to happen in the future. Now, all this in mind, remember that the racial wealth gap is going to 0. Okay. In 2053, the racial wealth gap will be going to 0. That means that the median wealth will be 0 for black people. Okay. You cannot do anything if you do not have any money. Now, the wealth gap isn't going to stop at 0. What's going to happen is it's going to flip and it's going to turn negative. And once it turns negative, it's going to accelerate at a faster rate, because then you're going to have foreclosures and repossessions. You're going to have a negative income, which means, what does a negative income mean? What does a negative income mean? That means that you're going to work for nothing. What does going to work for nothing mean? That means that you're a slave. You understand how critical this is. Once the wealth gap goes to zero, if it does not correct itself and become positive, beyond zero, it will become negative. At some point, the median wealth gap for the lower and middle classes will be larger than the median income. At that point, you will be working in this society for free again. Okay? There will be no one to advocate for you, because your population is being diluted by the man that you put in office. I'm tired of explaining this. You know what I'm saying? I'm tired of trying to get this through people's heads. It's not a game. It's not a troll game. It's not a racism thing either. It's a self-preservation thing. It's mathematical. There's no opinions there. If I go to a job and after I've worked my hours based on my hourly rate, if I come from that job with no money, that means I'm working for free. That means that I'm either a volunteer or a slave. But you cannot live in a society and not pay debt. So to remain here, if you cannot pay taxes, you will still have to work. It will be legal slavery, people. And that's where you're headed. You understand? That's why I turn the music off. Now there's more, okay? A recording of the virtual meeting attended by Biden, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, and civil rights leaders was obtained by The Intercept. Excerpts from it can be heard in this week's Deconstructed podcast, which you can find for free on any platform that hosts podcasts, okay? So we're going to listen to this, okay?
And so there's some things that I'm going to be able to do by executive order. I'm not going to hesitate to do it. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to do what used to, Benita, you probably used to get angry with me during the debates when you'd have some of the people you were supporting say, on day one, I'm going to executive order to do this. Not within the constitutional authority. I am not going to violate the Constitution. Executive authority that my progressive friends talk about is way beyond the bounds. And as one of you said, maybe you, Reverend now, whether it's far left or far right, there is a Constitution. It's our only hope, our only hope. And the way to deal with it is where I have executive authority, I will use it to undo every single damn thing this guy has done by executive authority. But I'm not going to exercise executive authority where it's questioned, where I can come along and say, I can do away with assault weapons. There's no executive authority to do away with that. And no one's fought harder to get rid of assault weapons than me. But you can't do it by executive order. If you do that, next guy comes along and says, well, guess what? By executive order, I'm going to say everybody can own machine guns again.
Yeah, nobody's talking about machine guns, Creepy Joe. Okay. So now here it says, so there's some things that I'm going to be able to do by executive order. I'm not going to hesitate to do it. But what I'm not going to do is to do what used to do. Venita Guapta, you probably used to get angry with me during the debates when you'd have some of the people you were supporting say on day one, I'm going to have an executive order to do this, not within the constitutional authority. Watch my video from yesterday, okay? Because yesterday I showed where he was lying, and there's a reason why he's lying, okay? Because America is about to have a slave class again, okay? I'm not going to violate the Constitution, okay? But it's not a violation of the Constitution. Article 2 of the Constitution facilitates him being allowed to do this. He just sat here and lied, and nobody's outraged about it. Everybody online is upset about Kevin Samuels. Nobody's upset that he just sat here and lied about beneficial legislation that he denied to civil rights leaders. Now, here it says executive authority that my progressive friends talk about is way beyond the bounds. And as one of you said, maybe it was you, Reverend Al, whether it's the far left or far right, there is a constitution. It's our only hope. Our only hope, and the way to deal with it, where I have executive authority, I will use it to undo every single damn thing this guy has done by executive authority, starting with the bathrooms for transgender people. We talked about that yesterday with Tulsi Gabbard fighting against that. Shouts out to Tulsi Gabbard. You know what I'm saying? But he's not using it to undo anything else. You know what I'm saying? But I'm not going to exercise executive authority where it's a question. Now, why would it be a question? Why can you just use executive authority to undo transgender bathrooms, transgender sports, transgender military, but you can't do anything for black people? Why would the Constitution prohibit you from doing anything to black people, but you can do things for others? See where I'm going? You have to ask yourself these questions. Now, again, if there's white people listening, this is not an attack on white people. This is an attack on Joe Biden's hypocrisy. Okay? Now, here it says, but I'm not going to exercise executive authority where it's a question. What is that question? Because Article 2 says that you have the ability to use it where you see fit. Then it also has to go through the judiciary branch, and it also has to go through the legislative branch. So again, it passes through all three checks and balances before it hits the federal registry. And it can also be struck down after it's already written. So there's no consequence to this, except for the fact that you may get dragged for many years after being the president that you wrote an executive order that wasn't beneficial. So why is it that the Constitution would stop you from doing anything beneficial for black people? These are the questions that people need to ask. If you're really so concerned, and now that the election is over, and the same people that wanted to repeat about the 94 crime bill, you need to go ahead and say some things on behalf of this. You know what I'm saying? So now, here this says, there's no executive authority to do away with that. And no one has fought harder to get rid of assault weapons. So here we go, talking about assault weapons. What does that have to do with anything? Okay. What does that actually have to do with a damn thing? Nothing. Nothing at all. We do that. Next guy comes along and says, well, guess what? By executive order, I guess everybody can have machine guns again. So we got to be careful. Yeah, that has nothing to do with anything. Now, you see, he's diverting. This is a diversionary tactic. All right. Now, here it says Biden also warned the civil rights leaders that pressure on the incoming administration around police reform could hurt the party's chances in the Georgia Senate runoffs, claiming that Republicans' ability to define that party in favor of defunding the police is how they beat the living hell out of us across the country. Well, nobody cares. We don't give a shit. Okay? So we can actually kind of skip down here. Okay? All right. Now we're going to listen to this clip.
One of the things I'd be concerned about, just as was pointed out to me that you wanted me to be concerned, Derek, I think it was you said it, about, dealing with Vilsack as in terms of agriculture. Well, first of all, you can learn more about Vilsack's record, but my point is this. I don't think we should make that a big issue going into before January 5th when the election takes place.
Now, if you guys aren't familiar with who Vilsack is, Vilsack was a person who was over the Department of Agriculture who fired one of these people's friends based on misinformation that was put out by Breitbart. Okay? And he's telling them to suck it up. They sit there silently and say nothing. Vilsack fired one of their friends who was a hero, I believe, in Atlanta. And they sit there silent. They don't do anything. Nobody. And then they say he has the nerve to tell them that they need to look into this Vilsack individual's record. And they clearly know about Vilsack. That's the reason why they were worried about Vilsack with voter backlash in Atlanta. Because based on misinformation from Breitbart, Vilsack terminated and never reinstated a established civil rights leader who was working for the Department of Agriculture. Okay. Again, you need to know every aspect of Joe Biden's deflections. Okay.
Down in Georgia. But I also don't think we should get too far ahead of ourselves on dealing with police reform in that, because they've already labeled us.
And this just shows how off base this just this just shows how off base and idiotic these civil rights leaders are. You're sitting in here talking about police reform. That shit doesn't happen on the federal level, you fucking idiot. It happens on the state level. This isn't even they can make broad spanning rules, but the state has to enact it. And the state has more power than the federal government when it comes to local and state issues. It's in the same constitution that Joe Biden lied about and said that he wasn't able to do executive orders because of, is the same constitution that will allow change to police precincts on a local and state level. But he's sitting here manipulating these people about federal police reform. How is that going to happen? Somebody please explain that to me. Why is that even a concept?
As being defund the police. Anything we put forward in terms of the organizational structure to change policing, which I promise you will occur. Promise you. Just think to yourself and give me advice whether we should do that before January 5th, because that's how they beat the living hell out of us across the country, saying that we're talking about defunding the police. We're not. We're talking about holding them accountable. We're talking about giving them money.
And nobody in this meeting held Joe Biden accountable. None of these people were prepared for this meeting. None of these people were prepared for this meeting. This is pathetic.
To do the right things. We're talking about putting more psychologists and psychiatrists.
So here he's in a spiel about defunding the police. He's explaining to these people how the police departments are actually going to get more funding. Pay attention. Listen.
Do the right things. We're talking about putting more psychologists and psychiatrists on the telephones when the 911 calls through. We're talking about spending money to enable them to do their jobs.
Spending money to enable them to do their jobs. That does not sound like defunding the police. That sounds like refunding the police. Let's listen again.
To enable them to do their jobs better, not more, with more force, with less force and more understanding. But that's, I just raise it with you to think about. How much do we push between now and January 5th? We need those 2 seats about police reform, but I guarantee you there will be a full-blown commission. I guarantee you it's a major, major, major element.
Pathetic. Those are your supposed leaders. Now, we're going to skip past a little bit of this because I'm looking for specific stuff. And this is interesting. They didn't have any write-up about this part in the article.
I want to start by thanking you all for your leadership and support. You've rallied support against some of Trump's most dangerous actions, his failure to contain the pandemic and the mass casualty event it's caused in the Black community, his embrace of white supremacy that's been just straight out and continues, his attack on the...
This guy talking about someone else's embrace of white supremacy. This is comedy at its finest. This is comedy at its finest. This meeting is white supremacy. There's one white guy sitting next to a silent Black woman, telling 8 Black people what he's not gonna do with his power that they actually gave him. If that's not white supremacy, then I don't know what is.
I want to start by thanking you all for your leadership and support. You've rallied support.
I don't know. That's white supremacy and black stupidity as the fuel on the fire. That's what that is.
I want to start by thanking you all for your leadership and support. You've rallied support against some of Trump's most dangerous actions, his failure to contain the pandemic and the mass casualty event it's caused in the black community, his embrace of white supremacy that's been just straight out and continues, his attack on the ACA, which affects so many African Americans, his incitement of violence against peaceful social justice protesters.
Okay, so I don't know if Joe Biden is delusional or not. Clearly, he must be unaware or either ignoring things that happened just yesterday in D.C. You know what I'm saying? None of these people are peaceful. There's people fighting in the streets. You know what I'm saying? When there's fighting in the streets, then that means that the protests aren't peaceful. Joe Biden claims to have so much knowledge of the Civil Rights Commission and the Civil Rights Movement. When you were, helping segregate, did you notice the people who marched with Martin Luther King behaving like Antifa or Black Lives Matter? You idiot. Did you notice that?
Removing diversity and inclusion awareness policies.
We don't need diversity and inclusion and awareness policies. We need things that are specific for black people. Diverse people are not going at a zero wealth gap in 2053, and who knows how negative it'll be in 2054. There is a problem that we need addressed, but what you're saying is that the Constitution won't allow you to deal with it, which is a lie. Nobody, when you're talking to this isn't a diverse group here. When you talk to your Latino caucus, you don't talk to them about diversity. You talk to them about Latino issues. When you talk to your LGBTQ special interest groups, you don't talk to them about diverse issues other than the diversity and all of the different gender identities that fall under the LGBTQ classifications. You don't need to be talking to a bunch of black people about diversity. Now is not the time for diversity. Now is the time for community-specific issues, you idiot. And these idiots are sitting here and letting this fly. You know what I'm saying?
Across the federal government, and you've successfully litigated voting rights cases while the right to vote has been under more severe attack than any time since I was a kid. And you've helped in.
It's just unreal. Now, there's a specific part that I was trying to find here. I don't know. They might not have it on. But there's a part when he says, and you guys have to learn to work with Latinos. For one, there's never been any issue with black people and Latinos. It's not black people who are, deporting and pulling Latinos over, asking them for their citizenships. Joe Biden, we're not doing that. We don't run the police departments. We don't run USCIS. So you don't need to dictate to black people what we need to do with Latinos. You know what I'm saying? That sounds like something that the United States as a whole, who the government is not majority black, needs to deal with. So you don't come in a civil rights meeting instructing black people on how to deal with and work with Latinos. As a matter of fact, if those black people in that civil rights meeting were up to par and on point, which they clearly were not, you know what I'm saying? They were about as sharp as a fucking ice cream cone. Then they would have talked about these kind of issues. Okay? This. Right? Asiento de negros. Right? Asiento de negros between the early 16th and mid 18th century, an agreement between the Spanish crown and a private person or another sovereign power by which the latter was granted a monopoly in supplying African slaves. See that? Supplying African slaves for Spanish colonies in America. The contractor, Hacienda, agreed to pay a certain amount of money to the crown for the monopoly and to deliver a stipulated number of male and female slaves for sale in the American market. And Joe Biden just sold you all in that meeting to Latinos / Hispanic. So you're seeing history repeat itself. He's not going to do shit for you by way of policy. Your wealth gap is going to zero, and you gave him votes for him to decree asiento de negros, basically, in that Zoom meeting. The first such contractor was a Genos company in 1517 that agreed to supply 1,000 slaves over an 8-year period. In 1528, an agreement was reached with a German firm to supply 4,000 slaves. For its monopoly, the firm paid 20,000 ducats annually to the crown. Each slave was sold at a price not exceeding 45 ducats. All right. See that? So this is us working with Latinos, black folks, and you guys voted for him to, basically hand you over to this, right? So let's talk about this whole diversity thing, okay? We're gonna talk about this whole diversity. But I'm gonna go over this Asiento de Negros a little bit more. The Asiento de Negros was a monopoly contract between the Spanish crown and various merchants for the right to provide African slaves to colonies in the Spanish Americas. The Spanish Empire rarely engaged in the transatlantic slave trade directly from Africa itself, choosing instead to contract out the importation to foreign merchants from nations more prominent in that part of the world, typically Portuguese and Genoese, but later the Dutch, French, and British. The Asiento did not concern French or British Caribbean, but Spanish America. In 1497, the Treaty of Alvocas divided the Atlantic Ocean and other parts of the globe into two zones of influence, Spanish and Portuguese. The Spanish acquired the west side, washing South America and the West Indies, whilst Portuguese obtained the east side, washing the west coast of Africa, and also the Indian Ocean beyond. The Spanish relied on African slave labor to make their American colonial project possible. You see that? So, I mean, when people say, this country wasn't built on slaves, how do you explain this? The Spanish relied on African slave labor to make their American colonial project possible. So without African slave labor, the American colonial project, which, fast forward is now the United States, wouldn't have been possible. But if you listen to these, angry, entitled morons, this is Kang pseudoscience. We was Kangs. You know what I'm saying? Pseudoscience, right? This is melanated pseudoscience, right? This is blackwashing history, right? But now lacked any trading or territorial foothold in West Africa, the principal source of slave labor. Thus, the Spanish were reliant on Portuguese slave traders for all of their requirements. The Asiento specified the places of importation and the points of delivery, as well as navigation routes. The contract was usually obtained by foreign merchant banks who cooperated with local or foreign traders specialized in shipping, different organizations and different individuals who bid for the right to hold the Asiento. Now, this is interesting. Let's go back up here. The Spanish relied on African slave labor to make the American colonial project possible. So African slave labor is the predecessor. We created the predecessor prototype to the economic and world superpower that the United States is today. And yet and still, we have 0% of the wealth. Now, I got a question for, people who don't think that anybody's entitled to anything for that contribution. Do you think we just spent all the money? Did we spend it all on crack in the 80s? Or did we ever even have any of it? Nope, never had any of it. So my question is, how do you justify, that? How is it that when Joe Biden is asked about slavery, he changes it to immigrants. Immigrants are who kidnapped African American. Well, not kidnapped, but immigrants are who purchased and exploited African Americans and brought us here. That's what immigrants did. You see that? The Spanish, the Germans, right? French. That's what immigrants did. Immigrants purchased from shitty West Africans and exploited the people that they purchased. When people get upset, they say reparations is an attack on white people. No, it's not. The real people who actually are looking for reparation are actually looking at those countries in Africa who contributed to this as well. But again, this is pseudoscience. Kang shit, right? This don't exist. It's not real. It's a fairy tale. It's blackwashing history, right? I'm not with tearing down statues. I just ask that you have respect for my statue. You know what I'm saying? So now we go down further. And it says, thus, the Spanish were relying on Portuguese slave traders for all of their requirements. The asientos specified the places of importation and the points of delivery, as well as navigation routes. The contract was usually obtained by foreign merchant banks who cooperated with local or foreign traders specialized in shipping. Different organizations and individuals would bid to the right to hold the asiento. All right? So you get the hint. And I'll leave this in the description box. So, how does this connect with this? Well, see, here's the problem. Joe Biden said that you have to work with Hispanics. That's what he said. Those were his words exactly. You have to work with Hispanics, right? According to Asiento de Negros, it was Hispanics that initiated the slave trade. But Hispanics have completely benefited off of the slave situation that they contributed to in the United States from laws that were created to try to help break the slavery that black people were held under. Well, Joe Biden is saying you're going to learn that you're going to work with these people. Now, you might say, well, wait a minute, how's that work? I'll show you how that works. See, when it comes to Hispanic and Latino, right? These are categories that are in the census. And this is how race and ethnicity becomes weaponized by the government and becomes a social construct. The problem is that people are so emotionally attached to their race and so emotionally attached to their ethnicity that race and ethnicity, it's become permanently fused with how you identify yourself instead of cataloging. Because actually what this is, despite the fact that we do have visible genetic differences, is cataloging. This is cataloging people. This is inventory mechanisms. This is mathematical breakdowns in order to distribute and maintain power using quantitative easing. That's what race is. You know what I'm saying? Now here it says Hispanic and Latino. Why am I going through this? Because Joe Biden said that we have to work with Hispanics. How do you classify Hispanics? How do you say you have to work with Hispanics when Hispanics, really Hispanic, it only means, someone that can speak Spanish. Ancestry from Spanish-speaking countries. So you could be black and Hispanic. So what happens how do you classify yourself if you're black and Hispanic? Well, you always default to anything that'll take away the number from blacks. So blacks can never have any power. So if you're a Puerto Rican and you're black, you default to Hispanic. So now you've taken away from the numbers of black people. Now we have less political influence. If you're from the Dominican Republic and you are clearly black, nope, not for purposes of the U.S. Census, you become Hispanic, taking away more from that 13% and bumping up that Latino number. That Latino number that has massive amounts of people from massive different countries. an entire continent. It's an entire. I think Africa is one of the only continents that is, for the most part, dominated by one race, and I believe that South America is the only continent that's dominated completely by one culture. South America is completely Hispanic / Latino, completely. And don't even say anything about Brazil because they speak Portuguese. Portuguese and Brazil are still considered Hispanic. You know what I'm saying? Still considered Latino, right? But those are white people in Portugal, and those are white people in Spain. They're European. Spanish people from Spain are European, but they can come to the United States and live as white people and get minority benefits as Hispanics, despite the fact that they didn't work for their 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment rights, the Bill of Rights. They never were persecuted with slavery or Jim Crow, but they get to use slavery and Jim Crow legislation while living as a white person in the United States to get minority benefits that we can't even use. But Joe Biden says that this is okay. See, unless you're a black Hispanic, American black people, we can't do that. Even American black people that are actually Hispanic, I have Hispanic in me. You know what I'm saying? My kids are Hispanic. They can't benefit with any of this. None of this, quote, diversity, it doesn't benefit them because their dad, for the most part, is black. You know what I'm saying? So now you might say, well, wait a minute, those people in Mexico, they didn't have anything to do with that. Well, yeah, the problem is that Hispanic and Latino is more than just people in Mexico. Again, Spain, Portugal, all right? Every single country in Central and South America, all right? Now, am I saying this stuff to say anything negative about Latinos? No, not at all. I love Latino people. You know what I'm saying? If I couldn't love my family if I didn't love Latinos. You know what I'm saying? But I'm saying this because despite the fact that I have Latino in me, I'm a black man. You know what I'm saying? And my kids are black. And the way that the government treats black people is not fair. If Hispanic and Latinos were treated in the same way, I would advocate just as much. Now, people say, well, what about the people at the border? Those are people that are trying to come into the country illegally. We're already here. We were born here. As a matter of fact, we're here now currently against, the will of our ancestors. You know what I mean? We have completely different circumstances. That's why there's disconnect. That's why there's difficulty with community building. That's why there's everything. We are the currency of the United States. The wealth in this country is specifically tied to slave labor. And that's old money, forefather money, forefather land, Indian reservations. And then, people want to laugh when you say, well, that we have this issue, that issue, and that issue. Well, it's Kang science, it's pseudoscience. It's Kang shit. You just want a handout. We actually are not the people that got handouts. You can take the GDP of the United States from every single year since the United States was formed in 1776. Every single gross domestic product, and add that together. That's the biggest handout on the face of the earth. It's time for a reality check. You know what I'm saying? It's time for a reality check. And that's not pseudoscience. That's not Kang science. You know what I'm saying? That's just basic math. Right? So now here it says Hispanic and Latino are used to refer collectively to the inhabitants of the United States who are of Spanish or Latin American origin. Spanish, this means coming from Spain. Okay? While the terms are sometimes used interchangeably, for example, by the United States Census Bureau, Hispanic includes people from ancestry from Spain. So this means that you can hide under the minority blanket of Hispanic, get the Hispanic minority benefits in immigration and, you know what I'm saying, whatever kind of grants and government, endowments that you would receive. And then you can live your life visibly as a white person. You know what I'm saying? We can't do that. You know what I'm saying? And Latin American Spanish speaking countries. While Latino includes people with ancestry from Latin American countries, regardless of language spoken, it excludes those people from Spain or Portugal. So now when we talk about Latinos, this is only from South Central America. All right. Latino does not include Spain or Portugal. If you go back and listen to this Zoom meeting, Joe Biden says Hispanic. So when Joe Biden says Hispanic, that includes European Spanish people. All right. For example, the U.S. Census does not classify persons of Brazilian descent as Hispanic, since those are primarily Portuguese-speaking populations. All right. So, that being said, all right. With that being said, now what we need to do is go and look at the definition of white people. All right. So nobody get offended. That's the new thing. Like anytime you mention somebody's race, and if you say white people, all of a sudden you're talking about white people, or you're racist, or this, that, and the other. Well, nobody's racist, you know what I'm saying? And nobody's talking about white people, you know what I'm saying? I'm dating a white woman that I love very much. I'm discussing this in terms of how to deal with the government and their hypocrisy, which is currently Joe Biden. You know what I'm saying? But again, this is why race is a trigger. And they made it like this on purpose, so that when you're dealing with mechanisms of cataloging, you can't have these conversations because people have emotional attachments to their societal value based on what they see in the mirror. You know what I'm saying? It's a messed up system. Everybody's brainwashed. It's just some people got some people when they got brainwashed, they actually got brainwashed, and then others of us, we got caught in the Lynn trap. You know what I'm saying? So now here it says here, white woman and white man, redirects here. For other uses, see white, blah, 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 blah. White is a racial classification and a skin color specifier used mostly and exclusively for people of European and broadly Western European descent. Now, Spain is clearly Western Europe. Spain is clearly Western Europe. Okay. So now here it says, for example, in the U.S. Census definition, persons who are considered non-white in other contexts in the United States. All right. So see, the term at times has been expanded to encompass persons of South Asian, Middle Eastern, and North African. All right. So that includes Morocco, which ironically, President Trump just granted Morocco sovereignty. Okay. You see where I'm going with this? So now these numbers of white as a racial classification and social construct have been inflated by engulfing Asians, South Asian, Middle Eastern people, and North Africans. Now, a North African, a Moroccan, somebody like French Montana, can come to the United States, be black, but be white. How's that work? How does that explain to me? How does that work? You know what I'm saying? That's what these civil rights leaders should have been hammering Joe Biden about. But they didn't. They didn't. As usual, they failed. They failed themselves. They failed you. And they failed the future generations. So, those are the same type of people that'll tell you, your ancestors are probably turning in your grave. They're probably turning in their graves. They're probably turning in their graves. No, the ancestors ain't turning in their graves because of me. You want to try to talk shit about me? People want to talk about me the way that I live, or, what I got going on in my life. You know what I'm saying? Who I'm with, who I'm friends with, my family. You know what I'm saying? The fact that my kids are Latino. You know what I'm saying? I'm not a racist. You know what I'm saying? I'm not a bigot. I'm not prejudiced. You know what I'm saying? But I do identify with my culture. You know what I'm saying? And my culture is getting done wrong. And my culture don't even identify with my culture. And they letting them get done wrong. You just sat there and watched the hour-long video of it. So before anybody try to point the finger at me and tell me that ancestors is turning in my grave because of anything, because of who I had kids with, because of who I'm in a relationship with, because of what kind of job I work, because of how I talk, because of where I live, because of anything. You just sat there. You saw 8 people sit there and let black people get sold out by the president that they put in office to the same people who was the original ones who had a huge role in starting all of this nonsense that we got going on in the United States. So remember, anytime you point fingers at somebody, you know what I'm saying, that the rest of the fingers is pointing back at you. You know what I'm saying? So, I don't know, man. I don't know what the future is going to entail. I don't know what the future is going to hold. But I do know one thing. I know that it looks, very bleak. And I know that people need to step their game up if they're going to survive. So you better start figuring out what it is that you actually need. Because I'm going to tell you something. It ain't police reform and it ain't civil rights. Because we already got that. Figure it out. Clock's ticking. With that being said, I will catch you guys on the next video. Peace.